Landed a decades-long prison sentence. Dr. Jaffee is finally mastering what it means to break through addiction, and whatever that looks like for you. If it's not substance, maybe it's spending, food, even performance, right? All of us struggle to fight habits that we don't want. And so this morning, we have the renowned author and addiction expert joining us himself. Dr. Adi, it's stories like yours that really change people. And so I want to commend you for just the countless amount of physical and mental work I'm sure you've put in to reach where you are. Before we dive into these tips, though, curious for just a bit of your story, to whatever extent you want to share, how you got here and why you've committed your life now to addiction recovery.
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for that, Peyton. As you mentioned, I ended up facing addiction and a long 10 to 15 year prison sentence, but I started up in the middle, maybe even upper middle class family. And it was, I think the part of why I share the story is when people look at me now, they can't fathom that I used to be 124 pounds and addicted to meth and having not talked to my family for years. And again, facing about 15 years in prison because I was also selling drugs in order to be able to both survive and afford the drugs that I was using. Um, but the point is that it's gradual, right? It started for me at 14 with alcohol and weed, and then by the time I got to college, things got heavier and heavier. And then after a breakup and a depression, I just went all in on really, really heavy drug use. And I share part of that story in the book, in the upcoming book, Unhooked. But the main message is this: we tend to think that addiction is the thing that affects those other people that are out there. But if we look at food and technology, which includes love, porn, sex addiction, and things like that, in addition to alcohol and drugs, there are about 100 million Americans, including nicotine, for instance, 100 million Americans who struggle. So everybody listening to this right now is either struggling themselves or knows somebody who struggles.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you mentioned that too. I think I'd vouch to say everyone fights addiction in some way, right? I mean, again, if it's not so, I think initially our brains go to drugs and alcohol, but sometimes it's a lot more obscure. Maybe it's the internet. Maybe it's just perfectionism. I think that's an addiction in and of itself, wanting to perform in a certain way. So I think we all fight certain tendencies. You mentioned, though, the real key here is to identify the hooks, right? What do you mean when you say this?
Yeah, perfect. So people tend to identify the addiction by the thing that you're addicted to, the behavior. So you're a porn addict, or you're a food addict, or you're an alcohol addict, an alcoholic. But the reality is, and you can look at the research on this, the alcohol, for instance, if we use that as one example, was actually a tool, a medicine, if you will, started off at some earlier stage to heal or to avoid or to numb or to obfuscate, in some way to be able to ignore pain or to fit in. It's those things that we need to fix. And you mentioned before my own path. And, the stuff that's in this book is really the path that I took in order to get from that addicted person who had no relationship with his family and really, no skills to speak of. I'd barely graduated college. And I had to kind of put one foot in front of the other. Everybody told me my problems were with drugs. Even, I ended up getting my PhD at UCLA. Even at UCLA, the idea was that it's all in your brain, that there are these neurons and these chemicals, and it's because the way the chemicals fire that you become addicted. I've now been doing this research for 15 years, and that's just an oversimplification. What most of us want to forget or ignore is that when this started for us, there was a pain, there was an avoidance, there was trouble, and the addiction actually helped us. You mentioned technology addiction, so I'll just speak to it. I can't tell you the number of clients I have now whose main addiction is just staring at their phone for
Mm-hmm.
6, 7, 8 hours a day. Why? Because they're avoiding stresses, anxieties, and things in their everyday life that are much harder to deal with.
Yeah, and Dr. D, it's a very important line of work that you're in. So we're certainly very grateful. We got just another minute here, and I wish I could keep talking to you for the next hour. But I'm curious too, for you. I mean, you mentioned where you were in life. What was that click point moment where you thought you needed to make a change? And I'm curious too, for people watching who are maybe even deathly afraid that recovery maybe isn't part of my story, right? He's seen it from others. He's seen people write books and then they know that they can be clean, but for whatever reason, he himself feels his condition is more serious. Maybe he's relapsed or just feels that maybe this is just who I am, right? I can't fix it. What can be said in that darkest hour?
Such a great question. And I'll be quick about this answer, but if people want more, you can go to readunhooked.com. I'm giving free webinars to anybody who pre-buys the book. My goal is to get this message out to as many people as possible. And so I will just say this. Number one, anybody can change. Carol Dweck did a massive set of studies. It's called Growth Mindset. Anybody can change. You have to understand that as a starting point. The second piece is you do one step at a time, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Just get started. Don't worry about what this looks like 5, 10 years down the line. Get started with something today.
Wonderful.
And then last but not least, these things build on each other. So you don't have to figure out all the tools right now. You don't even have to get sober right now. You just have to seek out help, stop feeling afraid. And what I talk about in the book is stop lying to yourself and the people around you.
Dr. Adi, I hope this is not our last conversation. Thank you again so much. We appreciate the time. Unfortunately, we've got to go. We'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.